Welcome to Game Developers Essentials Lessons book. Today on GDELB, we're looking at Farming Simulator, which is something of an offshoot of Zelda the Warrior Princess. A critically acclaimed game looking into the meta-narrative of fan theorization. But the focus today is on its effect on society. The way in which it has changed our perspective as a whole, and how it's revolutionized the very way we look at video games themselves. Farming Simulator is unfairly maligned, and within this extensive, in-depth 10-minute analysis, we will reveal that small yet explosive part of Farming Simulator that has managed to subvert all expectation. And this very secret became a powerhouse in framing for what we understand and qualify as media. The plucky Brazilian development team from Heimenberger's Germany, named FROMSOFTWARE Santa-Monica, developed their first game in 1992, Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1, a game that on release showed us that Call of Duty as a series was now on its last legs, by revealing the healing system and several other innovations within the game to be something that barely any of us could consider fun, even if making it fun was technically the sound response, in my opinion. But this was clear to most, since an open-world shooter was now more appealing to audiences than a puzzle side-scroller ever could be. But why did the times change? Dynamic situational depth. Dynamic situational depth is very important to consider when we are talking about game design within the framing of mechanical programming. And when you have a player approach these ideas, in my opinion, we need them to be trained by the game to understand what the organic prose and the frenetic lighting can offer. Take, for instance, BioShock, BioShock 2, and BioShock Infinite. They are all Fearonic games, and all have a predilection to the claustrophobic linearity that one could offer during a time of play conditioning. Of course, we could argue there is a political message within the Shock series that is of offense to those who oppose you, rather than protection of those you love, being a preferential choice, which to me is almost the writing of Junpei de Lesseps III. And just as that philosopher once asked, I also ask, what is cosmic play definition? Well, that's where Dark Souls comes in. In the book Understanding the Game's Design Mechanics with Science and Chemicals, written in 1875, by Dr. Eugen Trausenbaum, there are several facts about video game science. Dr. writes, a player is not meant to approach a scenario in which to learn passively. It is meant as a gradual response to otherworldly active stimuli, most notably, the Asylum Demon. Despite the Asylum Demon being a pure flop in terms of community retention, it is touted as a vessel for the roughly equal footing battles you expect from simulator games of its time. It is one of the most difficult mini-bosses in the Dark Souls series due to its infinite health and its heavy weaponry. It is clearly a reference to the 100 AD Jesus stick style weaponry used by Roman soldiers, and this was present across the entire Dark Souls series, including Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, and the third Dark Souls game in the series, Dark Souls 3. In my opinion, many players will approach the Asylum Demon in one of 5 intricated, binary truncated ways in order to reach the sense of accomplishment and achievement one associates with cerebelic gaming. But what is cerebelic gaming? The first and second methods are the passive paced operations, Firaxis and Tripwire, teamed up to slow down this mechanic so dramatically that many people responded angrily. But what the general public didn't understand was that it was made slow to convince people not to use it, in my opinion. The third and fourth ways to engage required players to make use of their right analog stick and engage the Asylum Demon's attacks using the roll, dodge, shuffle, sidestep, bypass, and homeward bone attacks. This allows the player to engage in active participle interrogation. But what is cerebelic gaming? Bloodborne is Dark Souls 1's spiritual predecessor, and if I was to rate the games in order of best environmental discovery enablements, then the number one would have to be Dark Souls 2. And hey, that's pretty good. However, despite being made by different companies, the influence is clear. Dark Souls actually copied a lot of the Lovecraftian elements, including the plunging attack, spell use, pyromancy, and Lord Gwyn's famous Hikefire crown, taken directly from Book 3 of the Necronomicon, The Shadow over Inside Mouth, famously co-written by the astrophysicist Lydia Glorm Helmsworth. I didn't read the book myself, but I did Control F the word game, and I didn't find anything, in my opinion. Anyway, the plagiarism here isn't as important as the versatile verbs that were placed for it. When considering that love and craft are things we commit to, things we strive for, in a world so unforgiving and so painful, it shows us that FROMSOFTWARE wanted us to look inward and reflect upon our self-awareness, for us to pick up a mirror and really study our own personalities, to consider our own characters, to truly read our own lives, to write over the pages and to bleed the oceans of sorrow, and to fly the chariots into Zeus himself, to the freedom of the unknown. But that was never going to happen, at least not until 1998. Before 1998, Dark Souls 1 was considered the most terrifying horror game in existence, returning to its roots and really understanding that a jump scare here and there was far more important than the dreary and long-form establishment of sound and visual detail in the environment. The problem here, though, is that Dark Souls is not a horror game. It is not scary. But what is cerebelic gaming? Many people have claimed that Dark Souls uses the horror elements of trial and error to craft an impossible, nonsensical, free associative, architectural spinographic that gives way to an overlooking, nightmarish, grandiose, ornate, majestic incohesiveness. But how does it do these? It doesn't. When a friend asked me how to get through Dark Souls 1, I told him, you don't need to play the game in a CEREBYTE QUAIFE. There isn't a difficulty requirement. He would often play the game wrong and blame the game for it. Basically, I had to guide him through everything, because Dark Souls is a friend-oriented game, and if you don't have friends, then you may often criticize the core mechanical nuanced design principles. When you're approaching a level, you need to be aware that everything could happen. This is past participle, futuristic gaming, and thus there is no trial or error. If something happens to you that you couldn't possibly see coming, then you need to be more aware of the underlying script, the director, or in this case, the intentionalizational rotation pathing system. This is yet another feature that rose-tinted fanboys will attribute to the incompleteness, when what they don't realize is that the game itself is complete in its incompleteness. It is made to prevent you from leaving the perceived track and engaging in the elements of failure and restart. In layman's terms, you will engage in explorative sequence building. This is emblematic of many of the Lovecraftian elements presented in Dark Souls 2 as a series, in my opinion. So, aside from the obvious connections to the Lovecraftian elements, Dark Souls didn't want to be a horror game, and yet was classed that way, Could it perhaps be the link to its roots? If you look at the 7th brick from the top left shelving in the opening to the game, you can actually see that it is a clear reference to the 1915 movie The Birth of a Nation. And no other reviewers ever talk about this. Dark Souls was celebrated for returning to the linear, significalized level design of games such as Baldur's Gate, Steins Gate, Pokemon Stadium, and I Am Bread. But many in the fanbase wanted something more. When you look at the individual caramelized symmetricality within the texturing of Dark Souls, it becomes clear that symbolisational vectoring was a huge part in building the empire that From is now the king of. But what is a king? When you look deeper into the pacing of a game like Dark Souls, you have to relate the software to a more diverse labelling system. You begin with a black square, it doubles, and now you have a rectangle. Double that, and you have a square once more. This is called shapes. However, there are simpler ways to analyse these sorts of things. For example, vehicular trivializational unicity within patronised Crimson, or colorization spectrum. In other words, the red car law. But what is the red car law? The red car law began in the 50s as a potential deterrent to Russian ambassadors in the Cold War. If the Allies could capture the leaders of each state, then there could potentially be peace within the western centre of the Middle Eastern shore. As time progressed and Dark Souls was released, they implemented it as a safeguard against copyright theft. But what is the red car law? The red car law was developed into its very first bolt-action machine gun, but systemically split down into the very first AI system to be placed into a Souls game, and the only one since. Ask yourself this: why aren't there any projectile weapons in Dark Souls? Why can't you get back to the Stray Demon in Dark Souls? Why did they play a silly piano song in the fight with the Fire King in Dark Souls? Well, Lordran is not what you thought it was. It hides a dark secret. Lordran was actually developed from Earth itself. You can find remnants of lost paraphernalia and propaganda linking to the embryonic wall and even fossils of real-world creatures you have seen today. The common house shark can be found in New Londo Fortress next to the arching statue of Blenwith. More importantly, however, the Souls games have always managed to craft worlds in which we can find our own, or even the smallest of ways. But what is the red car law? Germanic science in Germany has explained that during several experiments on the human genome, it was discovered that there was no theoretical limitation of thought. Thinking is just another way of looking, and looking is another way of seeing. Once scientists knew that you could see thoughts, it was only a matter of time before thoughts could see us. And that is what birthed the team at FROMSOFTWARE in 1998. Dark Souls never knew its place in the world. It's filled with broken mechanics, bugs, and several attempts at copying previously more successful games. The world makes absolutely no sense, and you can't interact with a single character. The only thing of value in the game is the story, but that is a blatant rip-off of the 2015 Christopher Nolan directed film, Interstellar. But what is Interstellar? It is a movie. In my opinion, Dark Souls was a poor copy. In fact, there are several analytical videos covering this subject in detail. But what was important to the audience was that Dark Souls introduced an incredible experience, allowing us to fully utilize an incredibly well thought out system of movement, combat, and exploration while becoming enveloped in a world of mystery and grounded realism. Interaction with characters will tell you this is a dark and cursed world that you will have to carve your own journey through. Ultimately, many people don't realize that Farming Simulator is what began this incredible ride down variety and verism. The road to a peaceful war ending in the culmination of a solid gas. A flying wheel, if you will, in my opinion. Please subscribe and Patreon. In my next video, we'll be looking into the secret connection between Farming Simulator and the Dark Souls series, as we are over the 10-minute mark now, and I don't see the point in carrying on. Hopefully now you can understand the significance of one small game and the team behind it. And I would say that you have all made several comments about how one 10-minute video per month isn't much work, but I have to write 1,000 words each time I do this, and I have to research the games in question. Sometimes I have to play a game twice. Nobody is that dedicated. This video alone took 12 years to make. In my next video, we'll be looking in depth into the red car theory and how it was originally invented, unless a popular game comes out, or maybe a piece of drama. Please subscribe at Patreon. This was GDELB. Thank you. Please subscribe and Patreon. For more lessons directly from myself, an Essentials Guide trained game therapy core fundamentals operated video interaction science specialist, please check out my other videos, such as Dark Souls, where did it all go wrong? Dark Souls, the greatest game ever made? Dark Souls, should there be an easy mode? Dark Souls, should there be a Dark Souls 4? Dark Souls, should there be a Bloodborne 2? Dark Souls, is Monster Hunter just Dark Souls? Dark Souls, how Dark Souls is to blame for Trump? Dark Souls, is Dark Souls the Dark Souls of Dark Souls? All of that and more on my incredibly intelligent, well written, concise and graphically satisfying channel. Please subscribe, in my opinion. Please thumb up the video. Please support me on Patreon. Please use our affiliate link for Audible. Please subscribe. Please use the affiliate for Crunchyroll, Amazon, Nerdbox, Geek Crate. Don't forget to subscribe. And have a nice day. Please support my work on Patreon. Fucking subscribe, you pissheads.